Students. So this week we are um, coming back and we are going to talk about note taking. In our previous module, we looked at listening and concentrating, which are kind of prerequisites for learning how to do note taking. So this week you will have two lectures on note taking. Make sure you're going back and you are reading chapter 7 before you begin this lecture. What I would like you guys to do right now is go to chapter 7, section 7.1, on pages 160 to 161, and I want you to complete the activities under that section, and it's called Get Ready to Take Notes. So go ahead and pause this lecture, do that activity, and then go ahead and come back and start watching the rest of the lecture. So let's talk about why note taking is so important. And not just any kind of note taking, but effective note taking. First of all, it supports your information reception. So the better notes you take, the better you are going to be able to receive the information that is being presented to you. It also tests your understanding of the material. If you are taking effective notes, you are doing some good self-testing, and it's preparing you for what may come on an exam. Um, Effective note taking also helps you remember the material better. You guys had done a discussion on the effectiveness of handwritten notes versus typed notes. And the majority of most of you found that handwritten notes actually do help you remember the material better. Effective note taking also tells you what the instructor thinks is important. So you may have done the readings for the class, and then you go and you listen to a lecture, and then you get to kind of sift out the important stuff versus the things that aren't as important. You're listening for those instructor cues. Effective note taking also helps you with organization. Having good notes is going to be beneficial for you, especially when you have to take midterms or final exams, and you have everything in an organized manner. It's going to make it a lot easier for you later. Effective notes also act as a study guide for you. So we'll talk about some different note-taking methods this week, and all of them can be really great study guides for you. Most of the time, that's what you are studying. You're studying your lecture notes. And so if you do it effectively, you're going to have a really nice study guide to prepare for your test. Okay, so there are three parts to note taking, and this is outlined in your textbook, so make sure you go back and review it. The three parts of note taking are receive, record, and review. So let's talk about each of those steps. Okay, when we say receive, we're talking about what you do before a lecture. Before you walk into a classroom or you hit play to watch your online lecture, you need to preview the text. Okay, think about why we need to do that, right? Why do we need to preview the text? Well, when you are previewing the text, you kind of already know what to expect when you go into the lecture. And so it'll be a lot easier for you to take notes because it won't be the first time that you are seeing or hearing this material. It's also important to be on time. Why? Because your instructor may start class right at the beginning, starting out with notes right away, and you don't want to miss any of that. Um, and then potentially review previous class notes. Why do we do that? Well, we may be working in different parts of a section, right? So your lecture for one chapter, may be split up into 2 or 3 different lectures. And so you always want to go back and remind yourself because there may be things that the instructor will talk about in the lecture that you're listening to from previous classes. So all of these things are very important to do before the lecture, receiving the information that you need to before you listen to a lecture. Okay, so when you are doing this step of receiving the information, you need to know your instructor's style before you go in to take notes. This may take, a week or two at the beginning of the semester. At this point in the semester, you guys should all be very familiar with how your instructors present their notes. Once you know your instructor lecture style, that is going to determine a note taking method for you to choose. So you also need to know your own learning preferences for this because there may be, some instructors where, perhaps they don't use lecture slides. And it's just a video of them talking, or, if you're sitting in an in person class, they don't have any lecture slides, right? And so some methods of note taking may not be um, good for that kind of lecture style. And, if you know that, mind mapping is really going to work for you, but maybe that doesn't fit with your instructor lecture style, you kind of need to change some things so that you are kind of balancing both the instructor lecture style and your own learning preferences. Okay, the second part of note taking is recording during the lecture. It's very important that you use listening strategies. And the first one that you should use is your body language. Even if you are listening to a lecture online, right? Are you laying on the couch, scrolling on your phone while your lecture is kind of playing in the background, right? Or are you in a quiet space, auditory quietness, or even visual quietness, visually quiet? Um, or do you have the TV going on in the background? Right? So use good listening strategies, sit up straight, lean forward, right? All of those things are going to be important for you. So go back and review the acronym SLANT before you take notes, and try to remember that while you are taking your notes. Try to remember the best what you previewed. What did you preview in the text? What did you preview from previous lectures? Also, look for instructor cues. What are the things that your instructors are saying or not saying that could indicate something is important or not important? And what is their body language? What is their tone of voice, right? So, depending on your learning preferences, you're going to pick up on different kinds of instructor cues. And really do your best to keep up with the instructor. Be very selective with what you write down. A lot of people like to type their notes because it's faster. And so it's a lot easier for you to keep up when you type your notes. But as we have found, handwritten notes are more effective. So you have to just be selective with what you've written down. If you've previewed the text, this is going to be a lot easier for you. And you can use something called a word diet, where you can abbreviate words. And as we'll see when you come back at the end of the lecture, you can go back and revise and unabbreviate those words that you had been selective with. Okay, so things to do while you are recording is write legibly, right? So handwritten notes first. Do your best to write legibly. You don't want to go back and go, oh no, I didn't know. I don't know what I was writing here. Don't be afraid to ask questions during a lecture. Raise your hand if you're in an in-person class, or speak to the instructor after the lecture if you're in an in-person class, or email your instructor, right? If you guys are watching this lecture right now and you have questions about what I'm lecturing on, send me an email, ask me questions. Okay, get some clarification. And make sure that you are marking any areas of confusion. Maybe you're going to use something like symbols where you put a question mark so you can go back and you can clarify that later, or highlight it, whatever you're going to do to indicate that, hey, I need to review this a little bit more later. So don't get so caught up on those areas of confusion while you're in the lecture. You can go back and do that later. Okay, the last step here is reviewing the lecture. Okay, so what do we do after the lecture? Well, hopefully you've handwritten your initial notes. And so now you can either type or rewrite them using your own words, right? A lot of times when we're taking notes, we're sort of just copying down what's on the slides. And so one way to kind of self-test and work on even like your information processing is to write things in your own words to see if you understood the material. Okay. So self-testing and reviewing, right? We talked about that at the beginning, how effective notes are going to be a really great study guide for you. And then go back and organize your notes logically, right? Within the lecture that you just read, maybe you were kind of all over the place in your writing, or maybe the lecture itself was a little all over the place. Go back and organize it in a way that makes logical sense, that is going to help you study for your exams later. Okay. So, I get this issue a lot. You know, obviously, as a college student, we want you to be present in class, whether that's online or in person, to be able to take notes. Right. In high school, I mean, I taught middle school and high school, and so if students were absent, they got this time to make it up, right? Especially if it was a excused absence. You don't really get that in college, right? You're just kind of expected to, well, first of all, be there. But we get sick, we have emergencies, things come up. And so what do you do if you're absent? Right? What do you do if you have an emergency or something, and you can't watch your lecture, or maybe you can't go to class a specific day? First thing, never ask an instructor, did I miss anything important? Okay. This is a question that I got a lot when I was a high school teacher. And I would always sarcastically reply to them, "Oh no, we didn't do anything. We knew that you were absent, so we decided to sit and twiddle our thumbs." Right. And so we would laugh about it. I would make a joke about it. But really, for some instructors, that can come off as very disrespectful. That you didn't do anything important in class. And I can tell you, coming from previously teaching in the K-12 arena, you have much less time with your college students. You have much less time to lecture. Instead of 5 hours a week that you are seeing your students, it's 3 hours a week. Right? That's about the amount of time for an in-person class that you're going to go to a lecture, right? So never assume that they didn't do anything important in class. Of course they did something important, right? There's valuable time that needs to be spent. And so you may have asked this question before, not thinking that it could come across as, disrespectful or offensive to an instructor, but it really can. So you have to be very careful with how you are approaching your instructors. Okay. So if you're absent, the first thing that you should do is check Canvas, right? Or your class website, whatever that is. If there are no lecture notes posted on Canvas, ask your instructor for a copy of the notes. Ask a classmate, borrow notes from a classmate. Go back and take notes on the readings that you did. Kind of do that on your own, because that's what was covered in class. There are a lot of suggestions for you in the textbook, and so I highly recommend that you go through and you look at the other suggestions on what you should do when you are absent. These are just a few that I thought were very, very important, and I wanted to mention to you guys. Okay, so this is preview for Thursday, but this is a preview for your next lecture. Okay, as you can see, this is my lecture notes for my in-person class. So here's a preview on some note-taking methods, and we're going to dive a little bit more into this in the note-taking lecture part 2. Okay, so one of the types of note-taking that you can do is the outline method. There are advantages and disadvantages to every kind of note-taking method. For the outline method, some advantages are it keeps you well organized, it records relationships, and it's very easy to review. Some disadvantages are that it requires thinking about organization. You have to know how to organize it. And it is not great for fast lectures. So if you know that your instructor talks really fast and moves through material really quickly, you probably shouldn't use the outline method. Okay, next is Cornell Notes. A lot of students really hate Cornell Notes, but there are some really good things about it. It's very, very organized. It's super easy to review later, acts as a great study tool, especially because you're asking questions, right? You can fold it over and you can ask yourself those questions and then see the answers, and then you have your summary at the bottom. Okay. Some disadvantages of Cornell Notes is that you have to set up your paper in advance. If you try to set up your paper at the time that you are watching your lecture or going into class to listen to your lecture, you're going to miss something because it takes a long time to set up these notes. And you really have to listen extra closely when you take Cornell Notes to make sure that you are putting everything kind of in the right place and you're organizing it logically. Okay, the next example is mind mapping or concept mapping. We'll just call it the mapping method. Those of you who are visual learners may really like mind maps or concept maps because it helps you to visually track a lecture. Now, if you lean more left-brained, like I do, like I'm a visual learner, but I lean more left-brained, I have a really hard time with mind mapping because it seems very disorganized to me. Okay, so that's listed as one of the disadvantages. The mapping method makes it very easy to see relationships between concepts. It's very easy to edit. You have these bubbles and you can just kind of erase what's in the bubbles. And again, those of you who are visual learners or even kinesthetic learners, you can add color, right? That doing that is both relates to both visual and kinesthetic learning preferences. So some disadvantages of the mapping method is that it's can be kind of hard to distinguish between major and minor details because everything can kind of be all over the place when you're doing a mind map, and it can look kind of messy to some people. If you're more right-brained, you may prefer the mind mapping method. If you're someone like me who is, I guess I'm a little bit more balanced, but there are some things that are that I don't like it to be disorganized. And so if you know yourself, you may know, hey, this one isn't really gonna work for me. Okay. And then finally is the charting method. And this might be a new one for you guys. I'll show you some examples on the next lecture. So for the charting method, it records the most important information. There's way less writing to do for the charting method, and it can be very easy to review. The disadvantages of the charting method is that it takes practice to learn how to take notes in this manner, and you really need to know your readings, the content before you watch a lecture, right? So you have to be very well versed in the content already, kind of already need to know what the instructor is going to talk about. Okay, so this is a preview for you. I'm going to show you some more specific examples in our next lecture, which is note taking part 2.